Last week you worked with manuscripts, which again are the papers of private individuals' institutions. This week you'll be looking at the records of public institutions. The size of collections of government records available to you in archives dwarf those of manuscripts. This should come as no surprise. The government bureaucratic process produces a lot of paper. Just consider that closing shot of the first Indiana Jones movie, that warehouse full of government secrets and records. Also, governments often do a better job at keeping old records around than people, often because they have a legal need to do so. Government records are collected by archives, usually through a statutory process, and most often are held by governmental agencies. The National Archives, for instance, is the official archives of the federal government. The State Archives of Wisconsin is located within the Wisconsin Historical Society, and the UW-Oshkosh Archives and Area Research Center is, by extension, the official archives of 5 counties and numerous municipalities in this region. Government records can be a diverse lot, from generalized reports on social, environmental, commercial issues to individual case files on people receiving, say, social welfare services. It can include correspondence of low-level regulators or that of secretaries of agencies, governors, legislators, or the president himself. For this project, you're going to examine what is probably the most used governmental record series, the decennial census. The decennial census is mandated by the U.S. Constitution and serves as the basis of congressional apportionment and the distribution of government resources in 1,000 other ways. It also helps historians by providing a snapshot of our country every 10 years, although the depth of that snapshot varies from census to census, as the questions asked change, generally becoming more involved and helpful as the years progress. The first census was taken in 1790, and this process has been repeated every 10 years since. The all-important statistics from a census are usually available within a year of the completion of the process. But while this data can be helpful to historians, it's what's confusingly called the manuscript census, or enumeration forms or schedules, where you find the information on individuals. Due to privacy concerns, these forms are kept confidential until 70 years have passed. But for your study of American slavery, you're certainly in the clear. Here at UW-Oshkosh, you have access to indexed digitized images of the federal census through a subscription-based database called Ancestry.com. You want to make sure that you go to the site through our link here on the library homepage. You'll find the resource right here on the Know Where You Want to Search list under A for Ancestry. Ancestry.com has hundreds of small databases helpful for family history research, so you want to isolate yourself right away by choosing a census to search. Certainly you will find slave owners from 1790 to the 1860 censuses. Slaves were included in the regular sections called schedules of the censuses from 1790 through 1840. In 1850 and 1860, they were counted in separate schedules, but in most cases were not enumerated by their name, just listed under the slave owner's name. You can certainly try to find slaves in the northern regions, say, using the earlier censuses. However, due to the nature of the ever-expanding snapshot provided by more modern schedules, you will learn more by using the 1860 census and examining families of different regions of the slave states, including, say, the Deep South, border states, and maybe a western state like Texas or Arkansas. I'm going to demonstrate on the 1860 census, but again, you can choose any census prior to that. So if we view the list of censuses here, when we expand this list, we can find the 1860 slave schedule right here. In 1860, there were roughly 385,000 slave owners in the United States, about 4.8% of the southern white population. These individuals owned over 3.7 million slaves, so they shouldn't be too hard to find. But Ancestry.com makes it easier to find a slave owner. So if we look at this search box here, you can search either by the slave's name, but as I mentioned, they're not normally counted by their name. So a better way to find slaves and slave owners is to search under the slave owner fields. Now, if you know a specific owner's name, say from your research last week, you could try to search for them here. If you have no specific names, you can simply select a state, including from this list of slave states, including odd little Delaware. We're going to pick Mississippi, and a county as well to make it more specific. I'm going to pick Yazoo County because we know the slaves will be there, and it's also fun to type Yazoo. If we search for that county, we're going to get 961 hits. Now, this is not to say that there were 961 slave owners, because the census is an imperfect process, as is the indexing, and I know for a fact that a lot of these owners are listed more than once. As the name's probably nothing to you, you can just pick anyone at random to find out about the slaves these owners had. I might recommend choosing someone with a more unique name for a reason I'll explain later. Let's choose this guy right here, Martin Anding. Click on him, and you'll see that a lot of the information from the census has actually been indexed, has been transcribed by the people at Ancestry.com. But not all the information. You certainly want to view the census by clicking on this link to actually see this. This usually pops up because there's a separate viewer that Ancestry has, but you don't need to download it. You can just click there to get the standard view. So here's a page of the manuscript census from 1860 that includes Martin Andings as a slave owner. He starts right here, and all of his slaves, starting with number 1, going down. Now, this gentleman has so many slaves that it actually continues on the next page. I would put no stock in the order in which these slaves appear. Just consider it random. Now, while the census didn't ask a lot of questions here, there is still some valuable information. It provides the age, gender, and color of the slave, B for black and M for mulatto. Other fields ask the slave owner how many slaves are fugitives at the time and how many have been freed by the owner. I encourage you actually to find an owner with numbers in either or both fields. The next field asks about any disabilities the slave might have, and finally a question about slave houses on the property. This last number is usually listed. This last field's number is usually listed at the very last slave that the person owned. Now, you're not done yet. Once you've finished with this schedule, learning about all you can about the slaves on the property, you can attempt to learn more about the owner and his family by consulting the standard schedule. So if we back up, we go to U.S. censuses, but we pick the normal 1860 census, we can search by name for Martin Anding. Pick Mississippi. Yazoo County. And we have no results. Now, certainly Martin with an EN is one way of spelling that, but there are certainly other ways of spelling Martin. So I'm just going to search for his last name. And sure enough, there he is with IN spelling of his name. And that's one of the drawbacks of a handwritten census and indexing process. People don't always spell the name the same way, or they record misspellings completely. So if we view, again, some of the information on Martin Anding from his census is transcribed here, but you'll get more information if you view the schedule. Now, useful for your assignment in 1860, they started to ask questions about the value of someone's property. So we go to this census form, and we find Martin's name. We see that young Mr. Martin, at 22 years old, a planter, has $60,000 worth of real estate and $120,000 worth of personal property. Now, of course, that $120,000 is going to include all the human property that Mr. Anding owns, as well as farm machinery and other things. His $60,000 worth of land, if we just do a quick look at some of his neighbors, was probably a very large estate. So what else can we learn about Mr. Anding? If we look at the line just above his, we see Mrs. C. Anding, who, according to this number right here, is considered the head of the family that Mr. Anding and this Ms. Susan Williams are a part of. In 1860, the census didn't do us the favor of giving us information about the relationship between people in a household, but we can probably guess that Mrs. Anding is the widowed mother of Martin, head of the household, but certainly not its owner. Now, these numbers here suggest that she lived in a different home than Martin and Susan. And who is this mysterious Susan Williams? A widowed sister? A maid, perhaps? Although what a man with 100 slaves would need with a white maid, I don't know. The important thing here is that there were no children in the household, so there's probably less of a need of slave help in the home. Finally, other fields we learn that the Andings and Miss Williams were all from Mississippi. Note here that there is a field for race. Although with slaves being counted in another schedule, there probably wasn't much need for them to even include a W for white. Certainly if there was a free biracial or African American individual in this schedule, they would have certainly noted it in that column. Now you can certainly try to go forward or backward in time to learn more about the Andings. Did the family survive the war? You might want to look at the 1870 census by going back here and choosing the 1870 census. Do that. Now this is why picking a more unusual name helps, as the family might have been forced to move on from Yazoo County, and finding them will be easier if you didn't choose a name like James Anderson. Well, that's the census. Good luck.